Okay, hello everyone. This is Tina Papic, Jungian analyst. Welcome everyone in the name of Analysis and Activist Movement. As you see, we revived our talks, and I am very honored and grateful that Belgrade colleagues decided to share their stories, their views on what is happening in the moment. Not in the moment, now for quite a long time. So I will read now a short introduction that they prepared. On November the 1st, 2024, the canopy of the newly renovated railway station in Novi Sad, Serbia collapsed, resulting in the death of 16 people and injuring dozens more. The following day, students at the University of Novi Sad initiated a blockade, marking the beginning of a protest movement that quickly grew in scale. Momentum increased on the 15th of November when citizens of Novi Sad sparked 14-minute silent protests in honor of victims. Protests intensified after an incident at the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Belgrade on November 22nd, where another demonstration was met with violence. Public grief and outrage over the loss of life and reoccurring violence sparked a massive student movement leading to the blockade of all public university faculties in Serbia. These blockades remain ongoing, and now we are in June 2025. When Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić called for student representatives to meet and discuss demands in hopes of ending the protest, the students said no, you are not competent. They demanded institutional accountability and declared that they had no leaders, no official representative, and emphasized that no single voice could speak on behalf of all. The student protests in Serbia represent a complex and collective response. There is no single valid viewpoint. Today, a group of presenters will share their individual viewpoints in an effort to reflect on the issues that have led to the largest student-led protest in Serbia in the 21st century. I will present each speaker before the speaker will present their part. We will start with Bojana Stamenković-Rudić, psychiatrist, Jungian analyst, individual member of the IIP, family systemic therapist, and I would say many more probably. Bojana, please. The microphone. We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. Can you do something, Michael?
So yes, thank you, Tina, so much for this very informative introduction. And dear colleagues, dear friends, we are very happy that you invited us here tonight to speak about student demonstrations in Serbia. Thank you so much. And I would like to tell you, we are here as a group in which each person will share their unique experience of the protests. We are neither historians nor, nor professional analysts of social movements. We are not members of any organization that requires us to maintain a unified, uniform stance on the issues at hand. Each of us speaks in his or her own name. Yet, despite this, we are here together in the same space tonight. Yes. Because the cohesion within this chorus of different voices matters to us, just as the spirit of cooperation that has been with us over the past 7 months. I'm the oldest among us, and from that perspective, I would like to share a few reflections. And before that, Maya would help me with PowerPoint. Just a moment, please. Yes. Do we share it? Is it okay?
Yes,
Yes.
we can see
Okay.
it.
So we started with this, our poster. And now I would like, as I've told you, as the oldest one here, I would like to tell about the first concerns. The first concerns the global waves of protest in 1968. You know, mobilizations against capitalism, authoritarianism, and social inequalities, the fight for the liberalization of communist regimes, the struggle for human rights, often led by students. Back then, students in Paris chanted, "Down with the red bourgeoisie," a phrase that exposed the shadow of the ruling system, demanding democratization and freedom of assembly. I was a child at that time, but I remember, and I'm sure many of you know, that one of the main slogans was, "Be realistic, demand the impossible." The energy of those rebels, driven by a vision of more just society, heroes and tricksters alike, shaped the voice of that time. We demand the dismantling of the old paradigm and establishment of new values. We challenge the existing structure and call for a transition toward a new world. It was Paris then, now we are in Belgrade. Compared to today's movement in Serbia, a difference emerges. Social analysts suggest that this movement aligns more with the slogan, "Be unrealistic, demand the possible." An ironic reversal. The trickster energy alongside other forces is present again. This voice remains provocative and defiant as before, but now with a grounding in pragmatism. There is no reliance on idealism here. The demand is for an end to corruption, for the restoration of functional institutions, above all, the judiciary. The endangered autonomy of universities is being defended. At the same time, this slogan reminds us what should be achievable, reasonably expected, is often the hardest to secure. The protests were initiated by a generation of young people, rich in spirit, wisdom, emotion, clarity of thought, and sincerity. They have unleashed a wave of beauty, joy, love, and solidarity, connecting nearly the entire society through empathy and tolerance. They have reminded older generations that integrity demands that we raise our voices once more, that after decades of silence, we must again speak out and reclaim neglected values. The dignity of professions, judges, journalists, teachers, doctors, and others. They have prompted us to react anew against various forms of violence. I belong to a generation that, regrettably, allowed society to collapse in recent years. I'm grateful to the young people who have welcomed us into their movement. It is a great privilege to live alongside them in Serbia today. One of the most powerful collective acts in these protests has been the ritual of silence. One of the most notable moments of silence occurred in Belgrade's Slavia Square, where more than 100,000 people remained silent for 15 minutes to honor the victims of a tragedy in Novi Sad. Here, silence becomes louder than words. The paradox, silence as the most resounding protest. It is not merely the absence of sound, but a collective voice, a means to express grief, anger, and resolve. At the same time, it marks an initiatory threshold, a preparation for both individual and collective transformation. Beyond this, jumping, noise, and slogans form a ritualistic protest language, blending physical movement, sound, and symbolic speech to create a powerful collective experience. Popular slogans include "Your hands are bloody," a direct accusation against authorities, referencing corruption and negligence that led to tragedies, like the collapse of the Novi Sad railway station. Pump It, initially a sports chant, repurposed to energize the crowd, urging them to push forward. Students are peaceful, their humor captivating. Their love radiates. Their humor is irresistible. On Batman's shirt, it says, "Either the institution should work or he should come, Batman." Weddings are organized at protests with mobile registers. The feelings expressed by the bride and groom toward the demonstrators reflect the sentiments shared by many citizens across the country. Most university professors support the students and are protesting alongside them. As a consequence, the authorities have penalized them by withholding their salaries for several months. Some have taken jobs in coffee bars and similar places to support their families. Among older generations, there has been much crying during the protests. A collective emotional response, a moment when suppressed grief, anger, and helplessness finally manifest. Catharsis, a renewal through emotional release. At the same time, it signifies connection, a shared sense of loss and hope. Pain transforms into the strength of unity, and with renewed energy, the possibility of change becomes clearer. Tears of joy are an internal affirmation of meaning, a recognition that the struggle is worthwhile, that relationships have been restored, that justice is closer. The massive demonstration in Belgrade on March the 15th gathered around 500,000 people from all parts of Serbia. there was a deep sense of solidarity and unity with the creative expressions of the collective psyche. Simultaneously, we were sharing joy of being together and uncertainty about the immediate future events. About Air Canyon. And all of this preceded the alleged use of the sonar canyon on the same day, still unproven. Fortunately, a potential stampede was prevented. The official statements regarding this weapons deployment shifted daily. A week later, I received a Viber message from an acquaintance, and she wrote, "I've been meaning to ask how you and your family are after that Saturday's drama with a device that we don't have and have never had. But actually we do, though it's just sitting unpacked in a warehouse, or actually it's mounted on wheels across the city, but hasn't been used, or maybe just a little, like a megaphone. I really hope you weren't caught in the crossfire and on that side of Slavia." That was the message. Young people have continued connecting cities, towns, and villages through Serbia, walking hundreds of kilometers in organized groups. They keep running, biking thousands of kilometers all the way through Strasbourg and Brussels to draw attention to their demands. Everything that has unfolded in the past 7 months cannot simply stop or fade away. Change has already taken root in daily life and communication. A new voting bloc has formed from a previously apolitical generation. Perhaps the change will not be formally validated in the next elections due to internal and external obstacles. Internal. The violent violation of human rights regarding access to information via media and the manipulation of election procedures. External. The corruption of certain foreign politicians prioritizing personal profit from unethical dealings in Serbia. The mafia-like laws and collective shadow of global powers become disturbingly transparent in their actions toward the country. It is reminiscent of a moment at the end of the World War II, when a respected Western politician in conversation with his advisors said, "The communists in that country are killing Germans. We will support them. They will have communism after the war. I understand. You are worried? Do you plan on living there?" In other words, who cares whether our natural environment is devastated because lithium mines generate enormous profits for shareholders and politicians? Who cares if this impoverished country is forced to spend a fortune on outdated military aircraft, all under the guise of maintaining good bilateral relations? Who cares about captive regions in other parts of Europe, let alone the Balkans? Many young people have longed to embrace the proclaimed values of the European Union. They have a sense of belonging to Europe. They want the EU to be informed about events in Serbia, but remain determined that the driving force for change must remain within Serbia. Yet, they're already encountering disillusionments just as my generation once did. Balancing affiliation with the external world against bitter realities, corruption, political arrogance, neo-colonial attitudes creates profound ambivalence. Will this contradiction forever hinder progress? Or perhaps our next challenge is to integrate these opposites into a paradox that we learn to carry, entering a more mature phase of our society's development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bojana, for this very interesting and beautiful presentation. Really moving. Really moving.
Thank you.
I would continue with the next speaker, Alexandra Trtica, graduate geological engineer, geological consultant, certified Jungian coach, psychology student, and first-year student in education for Jungian analytically oriented psychotherapy.
Yes, that's right. Thank you for introducing me, and thank you, Boana, actually, for providing such an excellent background for all of us to continue. It will be much easier, so we can actually focus maybe on more subjective point of view. I also want to mention that I'm also a mom of the students, of one student that's a protester. And initially, actually, I thought that my presentation will be more focused on this, but it was just far too emotional. So actually, I decided to give it a little bit of Jungian frame. So here it is. So our children actually that were almost born in a house without a roof. And that's the main context that all these protests were happening and are still happening. The student movement that emerged in Serbia in 2024 was spontaneous, but far from youthful in a conventional sense. It was just ancestral. The Serbian students we speak of are not children of communism, nor the hopeful generation of transition. They are the offspring of emptiness, born after the wars and bombings when all dreams had already been sold off. Their entire lives unfolded in a country where laws were applied selectively, and dignity gave way to quiet compliance. And when 15 people, actually 16 by the end, died when at the collapse trough, it was not merely an accident. It marked the symbolic collapse of the last pillar of the public trust in Serbia. So this generation, actually, they were called the disengaged generation. Disconnection was actually their survival. They were labeled as detached, apathetic, disengaged. And indeed, they were disconnected, but not from life, but from reality forced upon them. Their silence was not emptiness, but a psychic shield. When one grows up amidst contradictory narratives, failed institutions, and national myths weaponized by every government, detachment becomes a form of survival. They do not trust leaders. They do not believe official narratives. They will learn to read between the lines, and not by choice, but by necessity. So they are not postmodern either. They're post-mythical. In Jungian terms, they just refuse to assimilate any imposed version of the collective persona. The masks of national ego shifted by changing authorities. Instead, this detached generation drifted inward, shaping symbolic worlds of their own: memes, code, independent research, and decentralized truth. But even silence has a threshold. And in late 2024, that threshold was crossed. In November 2024, students began blocking universities, bridges, squares, but these acts were not chaotic. They were rather rituals of reclaiming collective agency and reintegrating a fractured identity. Students walked for months across Serbia, and people welcomed them as liberators. Some met them with tears. Others offered whatever they had, like their last pieces of bread. In this silent exchange, something long buried began to awaken. So history reversed itself. And after nearly 4 decades, students from Serbia's Orthodox and Muslim regions, they marched together. I'm sorry, in Sanjak. In Sanjak, meals were shared for Orthodox fasting. In Niš, iftar was prepared lovingly. And in Belgrade, thousands greeted their peers with salam aleikum. I think that my generation waited like for decades to live and to see this. What followed was one of the most powerful phenomena in Serbia had seen in decades: a return of integrity, like the shadow's gift to a society long torn between memory and survival. The students became carriers of the hero archetype, not seeking power, but justice. The Jungian hero, long dormant beneath centuries of victimhood and resentment, returned, but not as a warrior, but as sovereign presence. To understand the essence of this movement, one must face the historical trauma that pulses beneath Serbia collective skin. The historical psychological context is simple. In the Balkans, time does not flow. It sediments trauma instead. While usual narratives frame history as a linear trajectory, in the Balkan, events are experienced as a cyclical yet congested accumulation, and they are intertwining rather than unfolding. So time here is a river, not carrying the past toward oblivion, but mud in which harrowing experiences settle, layer by layer. Trauma in such a landscape is not something overcome, it's absorbed. So no student movement in Balkans ever arose in vacuum. Each was an emotional response to the continuity of repressed misfortune, where collective unconscious layers were not cleared, but just transmitted. That's why the foundation of this awakening lies not only in concrete political repression, but in the inarticulate pain that young people inherit from previous generation. And transgenerational trauma, it's something that put our children between what they witnessed and what they actually feel. Analytic psychology knows that the present and the obvious are not the only things an individual struggles with. Of course, we have our right to ask, what makes an entire generation want to confront the undigested legacy of transgenerational traumas. What have we passed to our children? So let's remember, with 1.2 million dead in World War II, first, Serbs defended Europe and were left voiceless under peace negotiations. In World War II, Serbs were among the first guerrillas against Nazism. In the 1990s, Yugoslavia was violently dismantled and Serbs were turned into symbols of evil. By 1999, amid growing instability in Kosovo, including violence against Serbs and increasing organized crime, NATO launched a military intervention that consisted almost entirely of an air campaign against Serbia, justified as humanitarian measure. That's why for students in Serbia, Kosovo is an open invoice of betrayal. And they are using their right to ask every government since 2000, who gave you the mandate to sell it off piece by piece. What's very obvious with Serbian students is that they actually form the value system of their own. Having absorbed all of this as their inheritance, Serbian students came of age between two absurdities. A posture of political servility, not only before European Union, but before the entire international gaze, as if justifying their very existence. A silent international enslavement by domestic ruling structures was a second absurdity. These are children who received neither lessons in patriotism nor fairy tales about Europe. No one sold them illusions, so they had none to lose. This generation, almost given up on, forged a value system of their own. Much to the dismay of us, their parents, they were relentlessly shaped by Japanese, and I accept correction by my son, also French anime and video games. And yet, to everyone's surprise, they learned something untypical of civilizations, now dismissed as obsolete, that one sacrifice for freedom, that honor still matters. Very new thing for our generation. Now we face a young people who carries a transgenerational imprint of unprocessed mourning, instinctive resistance, and unresolved exile, not always consciously, but unmistakably energetically. But what happened with Europe? The students' demand that institutions function independently was not bureaucratic, but existential. Perhaps that's why the silence of Europe felt even more revealing. Students arrived in Strasbourg and Brussels with more moral clarity and were met with managerial indifference. Europe did not recognize the student movement as an ally of democracy, but rather as a disruption to its own strategic narrative. Presented with clear evidence of corruption, police brutality, and environmental devastation, the European Union responded not with concern, but with continuity, reaffirming its tacit endorsement of Serbia's repressive regime and declaring Rio Tinto's lithium operation as a strategic interest. It clarified the relationship and something deeper crystallized. So the students' electoral platform openly called for justice for the dead, rule of law, ecological responsibility, accountability, and a real, not rhetorical Europe. So they embodied the self, the integration of opposites, the synthesis of contemplation and action, of shadow and light. And a movement that carries the self does not vanish when ignored, it deepens. And here, actually, I wanted to write a final word, but it didn't happen because just things kept unfolding. So students in Serbia today are not merely the future. They are the return of memory, of ethics, of conscience, the reactivation of a long buried archetype in the collective unconscious, the rebel, the one who emerges when lies become unbearable. This battle may be political, but the battlefield is psychological. And these children born of the ruins, they did not come to fix the house. They came to rebuild the foundation. So that was meant to be this final word, but the pattern continued. Brutal beatings, police inaction, and a massive banner displayed in the center of Niš and center of Belgrade, bearing a disgraceful swastika, along with a message branding protesters and regime critics as Nazis. A student uprising for institutions, justice, and dignity is now being crushed, not only by force, but by moral inversion. To label the grandchildren of a nation that stood against Nazism without compromise as Nazis is not only an insult. It's a psychological operation that Serbs have been subjected to for over 30 years, an attempt to invert meaning, to gaslight a nation's memory, and to bury its history. So the country, when we saw it, just fell silent in disbelief. Because we know what Nazism is. Our grandparents know, our cemeteries remember, and both European institutions, when they lend legitimacy to those who try to erase that memory, and the European conscience, when it chooses silence over the truth, must remember it as well. Instead of a conclusion, I would like to say that quite resolute and profound, this uprising of Serbian youth is the return of meaning to a land that long ago lost its language for truth. The soul of a nation has at least confronted its forgotten self with question, do we still know who we are? As I finished these lines, it was the night of June 9th of 2025. Extraordinary local elections were unfolding in Zaječar and Kosjerić. This would have remained as procedural note had hundreds of fully equipped riot police and intervention units not been deployed to confront citizens. Their purpose to disperse crowds peacefully protecting ballot boxes from coordinated attempts at disruption by regime loyalists. But citizens no longer step aside. So this will not be the end, because this is no longer a fight against a broken system, but a stand for something just and whole, something that cannot be threatened nor silenced, for the soul. And once a nation remembers its soul, there is no one left who can take it from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, for this really interesting presentation. And now I would invite Nevena Tosic, pedagogist, constructivist, psychotherapist, and first-year student in education for Jungian analytically oriented psychotherapist.
Thank you, Tina. I would like to share with you a little bit of reflections from working with my clients in my private practice and what I've been through in this period. As a constructivist psychotherapist under supervision and simultaneously a trainee in Jungian analytical psychology, I have encountered numerous challenges working with clients, many of whom are students, during a time when student protests in Serbia were gaining intensity. The emotionally charged social atmosphere inevitably found its reflection within the therapeutic frame, emerging through themes of uncertainty, government oppression and violence, and personal responsibility. Amidst this turmoil, finding quiet, a space for inner stillness and reflection, became increasingly difficult. I often felt swept up by the collective current, both in my personal life and within the therapy sessions. News was coming from everywhere. The silence I was so desperately needed for reflection became elusive, as Hermes moving swiftly between worlds. And like the trickster, I found myself both inside and outside the therapy frame, questioning the boundaries that held the collective noise and confusion, striving to remain centered and purposeful. The trickster, on the other hand, and it's in his unpredictable ways, offered me moments of levity and adaptability, and helped me embrace discomfort and uncertainty, using them as tools for deeper reflection. So, somehow I found stillness in chaos. I have to mention the March 15th, when the trickster had played us all. It was the day of the most massive protest in Belgrade, as Boana mentioned before, when sonic weapon was used on citizens peacefully protesting and honoring the victims of the tragedy in Novi Sad, with 15 minutes of silence. The trickster came as the sound of terrifying and deadly wave, cutting through people like razors, making them run for their lives in massive panic. Many citizens were afterwards describing this feeling as the end approaching. The trickster had faced them with the death itself. Even though it was a violent and illegal act of the state, it also brought even more clarity and determination for further protesting to the citizens. This event also brought even more clarity to myself and my reflection in these times, and also as a guideline. The trickster, in his cruel theatricality, revealed how quickly the boundaries can be crossed. What happened on the streets entered the body, mine and others, as disorientation, fear, and confusion. But it also entered as a new capacity and energy for further work, and even more sharpness and concentration. The body, mine, and of my clients was at the time even more part of the therapy sessions. I would also like to mention the exhaustion I felt at the time, months after the tragedy in Novi Sad, and deep into the months of protests. Keeping up with events that were happening daily, inside and outside of the therapeutic frame, became extremely demanding. And this is where Jungian thought became of the utmost help. It gave me a perspective that was bigger than exhaustion, that gave that exhaustion a symbolic meaning. I began thinking about the collective unconscious, about archetypal patterns at play, and it made me feel small in a good way, as if I am a spectator of something more bigger than me, which allowed me to rest in my theatrical seat. Of course, supervision had played a vital role in maintaining reflective distance, allowing me to process my emotional responses, including moments of helplessness or being overwhelmed, as the therapy room became saturated with these collective feelings. At times, and again, it felt as if I was working with something larger than both my clients and myself, as though many more voices were heard in the room than just ours. And supervision helped me navigate this cacophony, while the concept of analytical psychology gave them meaning. Many of my clients are students, as I've said, but some of them are simultaneously employed in the educational system. Some of them have parents or relatives employed also in the educational system, which is the epicenter of rebellion, as we mentioned before. These split roles are often opposing and contradictory positions they hold, brought a lot of ambiguity in the sessions. Keeping these tensions of roles became extremely hard as the government tried to humiliate employees in the educational system, taking away their salaries. So many of my clients were confronted with both oppression and personal responsibility. Uncertainty of staying employed and existential questions were also a common theme. So it was not just a political crisis, but a deep identity crisis. How does one rebel against the very institution they depend on to survive? And how does one hold solidarity with colleagues while fearing for their own existence? The trickster showed up again, this time as unsettling force that reveals contradictions and refuses fast resolutions. In the therapy sessions, we were often left with questions that had no clear answers, but only the discomfort of being in between. But it was precisely there, in this liminal space, that something vital stirred. The trickster invited us to stay in ambiguity for as long as it is necessary, without collapsing into denial of contradictory emotions. That makes us human. Clients cherish this therapy frame, as it was maybe the only space where they could express these worries and not be judged. Some clients are parents of high school or university students who are actively participating in protests, marching through Serbia, carrying messages of truth and rebellion. Parents were torn between pride and fear, proud of their children's integrity and courage, but terrified of state retaliation. They were also dwelling on the ideas of leaving the country with their families for good, feeling guilty for the system collapse. Others found themselves at odds with their children, feeling judged for political passivity. In some families, this created a serious generational fractures, not just over ideology, but over different tolerances for uncertainty, risk, and hope. The trickster's presence could be felt here too, disrupting old family scripts. Space for reframing parental roles was there in the sessions. Clients no longer saw their children as passive recipients of guidance, but as highly ethical individuals and role models of the whole society. This shift was disorienting, but also deeply humanizing. For many, it marked the beginning of a new kind of relationship with their children. I would like to conclude that therapy in these uncertain times becomes a political act in the most fundamental sense. It supports the development of responsible, reflective, and autonomous individuals. I would even dare to say that the act of making space for genuine human experience in therapy sessions in these times is nothing short of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you for this really personal presentation. It was really interesting and touching. And now I would invite Đurđica Marjanović, occupational therapist in psychiatric healthcare and current psychology student, as well as first-year student in education for Jungian analytically oriented psychotherapy. Welcome, Đurđica.
Thank you, Tina. My name is Đurica, not Đurđica, just to say that. But it's not a big mistake. Usually,
I'm sorry, I have to apologize.
yeah. I will start with the words that I just sent. One link below in the messages. On the video, you can see the people who supported the professors. I will speak about later. Each of professors carried a piece of paper stating that there were one vertebra of the spine. And if you want, you can watch it later. That's the reason why I sent it. I will ask you if you can answer me. Do you see just my PPT? Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to speak. Somehow, I have always felt connected to these protests from many different sides. As a citizen, as a university student studying psychology, as someone at the beginning in training to become an analytically oriented psychotherapist, and as someone who is working in psychiatry. It sounds confusing, and it really is, but try to see this as a kind of journey. A journey that shows how things can be messy, mixed with many layers at once, but still healing and still full of hope. What I see in these protests is that people are no longer completely apolitical like they often were before, and I already see that as a big success. Before I begin my presentation about the interview I conducted with my high school teachers regarding the students' protest in Serbia, I'd like to start by sharing something personal with you. My father wrote a few critical posts on social network Facebook about the current government. Since I come from a small town called Ivanica, where the ruling party has strong control, we soon got a phone call from a family friend who works in the local government, like in the city hall. He told my father to stop posting such things publicly because my brother's child was supposed to get a place in a public kindergarten. Can you hear me well?
You were not so loud anymore when you moved your head.
Okay, I will start to speak a little bit louder. It's okay?
Okay, thank you.
He told my father to stop posting such things publicly because my brother's child was supposed to get a place in a public kindergarten, and that it might not happen if my father kept writing like that. I'm sharing this story to show the kind of fear people live in and how those in power use pressure to keep control over ordinary citizens. So let's begin. To prepare for this presentation, I wanted to investigate the position of teachers during the student protests in Serbia and blockade of university and high schools. After a call I made to the high school I attended, from 40 teachers, only 2 showed up, one male teacher and one female. Both of them were part of the student protests back in 1996. Here is the review of the questions I asked them and their answers. So this is the first question that you can see on the screens. When I asked what motivated them to join the protests, their answers were short and clear. The university students, when I asked what kind of change they expect today, they say it's the same change they hoped for back then in 1996, a change that sadly still hasn't happened. They said that stable and fair work of institutions shouldn't be something we fight for, but something that is normal and expected. Today, however, in this wave of protests, they see something different, something more honest and more beautiful. They believe that most people who joined are doing it with honest hearts and a strong belief in change. They said that they have never felt such a strong sense of freedom before. The female teacher said she cries almost every day while watching protest videos. You cannot see the presentation, no?
No, we're seeing the blank screen. It's too
No, it was something. No.
You can see like that?
Can you zoom
out a bit, yeah.
Out?
Is okay?
Yes, that's good. That's good.
Oh, thanks. And sorry. The female teacher said she cries almost every day while watching protest videos. She is deeply touched and proud of the young people, even though she didn't expect that from them at this time. When I asked if this was because people often describe this generation as lost, she said yes, but she added, their own generation was called lost too. Maybe, she said, that's just how it goes with every new generation. People look down on them until they showed their own strength. They also said that they expected that kind of strength from their high school students, but it didn't appear on its own. Instead, most of them felt indifferent. And that's why the teachers felt a moral responsibility to be the first to stand up, not only to push for change, but also to set an example and wake up awareness among the young. This is the second question. You can see it, yes?
Yes.
Since I come from a small town, I noticed that people in smaller places often avoid getting involved in any kind of change. Like they prefer to stay on the side. Still, the teachers say that it was actually the elementary schools that started the protest first, without fear or holding back. High school students organized a class boycott by themselves, but their teachers didn't support that action. On the other hand, students from the school that I've been at showed no interest at all, so it was up to teachers to start organizing. In the meantime, the law changed. Teachers were no longer allowed to fully stop teaching. The only protests allowed was to shorten classes to 30 minutes, but they all knew the government wouldn't care about that. In fact, that system would work well for them. The government could keep things going in the same way for endless more years without any problem. That's why the teachers decided to unite and completely stop working. Even a small disagreement could break them apart. If even one teacher decided to keep working, they would all have to go back to their regular classes. The school principal, who is a member of the ruling party, contacted the youngest teacher, who had only been working for 7 days. It was a serious threat. She told him he would be fired if he didn't immediately sign a paper saying he wanted to keep working. He told his colleagues about it, and they openly supported him and asked not to succumb to the threats. And he continued standing with the rest of them. Salaries were increased recently. After a long wait and many requests, now starting teacher salaries around 750 to 800 euros, and those with more experience get around 900 euros. But that's not the main issue. In our town, educated people usually don't come back there. Less than 10% of the population has a university degree, and most of them work in schools. It's no surprise that school staff were the loudest ones to protest. Health workers, of course, can stop working because of the nature of their job, but see their jobs as not only teaching, but also guiding students. And now that become clear. Even though they were coming to work and of staying longer than needed, people on the street were calling them lazy and useless. But they didn't stop working because they are lazy. They stopped because they have a goal that's worth fighting for. What kept you going in the protest, despite the possible consequences? And did you expect them to last this long? At one point, professors start thinking about going back to teaching because they felt that students shouldn't suffer anymore. Also, some colleagues said they were having serious money problems because they hadn't been paid. At one point, they decided to return to teaching. But what happened? The night before they went back, during a peaceful protest, a car intentionally hit a girl named Sonia. She was badly hurt and barely survived. Sonia became a symbol of the strong spirit of these protests. One teacher shared that every day during the protests, she looked at her two daughters and knew she was doing it, at least partly for them. Their support meant a lot to her and gave her strength. She believed this might be the last chance to change something before people slowly give up and accept the system as it is. She knew that the main problem is fear, the feeling that people are not allowed to talk about certain things. And she knew that this fear had to disappear. Unlike her, The male teacher said that for him, the protests weren't the end, but the beginning. He said he's determined to continue because activism became important and personally meaningful to him. It seemed like he was driven by stubbornness, like something inside him woke up and now he has no plan to stop. Going back to the story about the principal who threatened to fire a young teacher who had just started working if he didn't stop participating in the protests. That teacher told her that his colleagues had asked him to stay without them and promised to support him fully. One of those colleagues was my former teacher. At that time, an anonymous Facebook page appeared called Dossier Ivanica. It started posting information and description of people active in the protests. Even though it didn't say names, the descriptions were detailed enough that everyone in our small town of 20,000 people could tell who it was about. It's one of those posts the teacher I mentioned was described as an aggressive man, a bully, and a wannabe beekeeper. He laughed and replied, "Okay, I can be aggressive, I can be a bully, but I wanna be a big keeper." Now that's the part they'll pay for, but he said that in a humoristic way. This is one additional slide. During the conversation, I felt like the real answers were hidden deep down, almost like something ancient, a basic fear of evil that doesn't even need to be named. Who had been planning this interview for a long time, and I felt that delays weren't just because they were busy. There was fear for their safety, for their families, for fear of losing their jobs, fear of public shame and judgment. One cancelled meeting, then another, then third one, and I was also close to giving up on this, but somehow I didn't. When they finally came, even though they knew we would record this conversation, this clearly made them feel uncomfortable. I immediately told them I wouldn't use anything without their full permission. After the interview, they told me, "Do whatever you want, you have our permission." Still, I knew I had to respect that fear, not because it was irrational, but because it was fear. It was real. Later, when I opened the video file, something unexpected happened. The sound wasn't recorded at all. Before that, we tried and had tested it like several times, and everything worked fine. I got chills. For a moment, we returned to the topic of feeling disconnected. I told them that I have always felt unsatisfied in a role of student, mostly because I felt left out of society. Since I'm now close to finishing my studies, only my final thesis is left. This was a big moment for me. These students' years won't just fade away. For a moment, we went back to the topic of isolation. I shared with them a feeling that followed me for a long time, the dissatisfaction of being a student who feels excluded from the bigger picture of society. That's why this conversation means so much to me. Now that I'm almost done with my studies, I felt something shifting. This moment matters to me because I know my student days won't disappear into a blur. The five question. How does the modern political system shape the behavior and opinions of citizens? And do the values promoted by the government match those that society should follow? This is the answer of the teacher, the female teacher. The political system we have today doesn't build good citizens. It confuses them. Instead of the supporting critical thinking, solidarity, and responsibility, it pushes people into apathy, fear, and silence. The values promoted are not the ones society should care about. Children are not taught to think, but to obey. Hard work and knowledge are not rewarded, loyalty and obedience are. That's why education has become a key place of resistance, because in school we can still talk about real values. At least we try. The male teacher said like this system shapes people so they are not real citizens but followers. Everything that comes from the top teaches people not to think for themselves. The government promotes values that help them keep control, not the ones society needs, like honesty, freedom, knowledge, and solidarity. That's why they call us lazy when we ask for justice. But we in education know best what it means to invest in something that doesn't show results right away, because education is the slowest but also the most important fight. In this cloud I post on the presentation is actually a thinking from my female professor. And just the last sentence is mine and something that I have in my own experience. The teacher said that the grandmothers in our town used to have a very different role. They tried to raise their grandchildren with honesty and moral values, but today, those same grandmothers stay up late at night watching reality shows full of scandals and immoral behavior of national TV. Now, grandmothers are losing their traditional role in raising children and often just say, as long as you're alive and healthy. Even in psychiatry hospitals, some grandmothers say they see people from reality shows in their rooms as hallucinations. What would you say to young people? How do you see the future of activism in education and society after all this? Are there any questions on your mind about the future of young people in this country? The female teacher said like this: I would tell young people not to stay silent. Don't wait for people else to fix things. Don't give up before you try. If you don't fight for your place in this society, no one will give it to you. The future of activism, if young people stay like I saw them during the protests, there is hope. But they will have to be more persistent than we were. Don't accept it is what it is. Always ask questions even when they tell you not to. Male teacher said like this: don't wait to be grown up to be brave. Speak up now. And remember, you are not alone. We are not here just to teach lessons, but also to stand with you when it's hard. Activism doesn't start with big words. It starts when you say, this is not right. And about the future, I often wonder, will there be anything left here from them to stay for? But then I see them protesting, organizing, thinking, and I start to believe that maybe there will be. This is the advice I asked them for. And the last question that just came to me during this interview. At the end, I came back to the advice I said I would ask for. There was a deep silence. I felt like all the symbols of high school were floating around me. I asked, do you think it's worth spending so much energy on these protests? They nodded, smiled, and said, of course it is. They added, don't doubt it. We watch the protests videos every evening. There were moments when they also thought about giving up. A student named Sonia was hit by a car during the peaceful protests. So many people died on the railway. Even doctors from the Mental Health Institute held short daily protests, and during one of them, two women doctors were intentionally hit by car. Because of them and because of all us, we continue. In the end, we shook hands because shaking hands with honest people never goes out of style. Then we sat down at the table to the feast that my family has prepared. Maybe this wasn't the movie I imagined that it would be, but it carries true and weight that can't be ignored. I have to thank to my family, my professors, and my friend Jovan Milinkovic, who helped me with his knowledge and his presence. And thank you for listening to me on this journey that honestly shows how one student sees the world, searching for meaning, connections, and patterns, making decisions with, I hope, both using and logic and emotions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jurica, for this collage. Very interesting. And now I would invite the last presenter, Maja Nikolic. She's a sociologist with over a decade of experience in the humanitarian and psychosocial sector, primarily through work in the Red Cross in Belgrade. Currently in the third year of education in Jungian analytically oriented psychotherapy. Welcome, Maja. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tina, and I will be really short because I know it's already too late. I would just like to conclude and maybe give a bit broader perspective on what we have talked this night. So, as you probably noticed throughout the previous presentations, we heard a great deal about values. It seems that the traditional narrative we learned from history books of lower classes struggling against the rich no longer fully applies in the 21st century. What we are witnessing today in Serbia, but I need to mention in many other countries as well, is something different, an uprising of the middle class standing alongside farmers, workers, artists, and intellectuals. Through the work of sociologists, we became all well aware that we live in an era of postmodern relativization of values. This void of values makes us all hurt, and the therapists work their best to help people live through it, individually dive into oneself and find personal values to give each person a reason to live in this world. However, it seems that individual healing alone is not enough. What we are living in Serbia today is not the fight among the classes, it is the striving of a big portion of the nation to once again reestablish the values. And Serbia is not alone. This is becoming a global phenomenon, and we can see it in Macedonia, Greece, Turkey, Romania, Germany, Slovakia, and I'm just mentioning here European countries because it could take all night to mention all the countries where we can see the protests. So all around Europe, massive protests are happening with one urge. We stand for values and we stand for truth. The biggest value of all becomes the value of human life and nature itself. Other than that, we analyzed a lot in the last 20 years how industrialization and social media brought alienation. This was a big topic, I think. As much as this is true, today we can see one more hidden but nasty head of the technological revolution, multiplicity and the fabrication of truth. Not just through social media, but through traditional media as well, such as newspaper and TV. And above all, newspaper and TV, I think, at least in Serbia. Offering people an endless stream of conflicted truths has a numbing effect, one similar to the boiled frog syndrome, and a lot of you psychologists here know too well the consequences of this. Today's uprising of students in Serbia and in many other countries across Europe and world is the most vital reaction to these tendencies. We want truth and we want accountability. The only thing that is keeping us from some bad dystopian thriller of the future. And at the end, I would like to come to the beginning of this presentation. Bojana Stamenković-Rudić spoke about the power of silence. She reminded us, when used with intention, silence can speak louder than the words, becoming a resonant form of protest, a way to express grief, anger, and resolve. I would like to add that there are two types of silence. Silence as a place of reflection, offering respect, gaining insight, and renewal. And silence that is deadly. When those in power choose to remain silent in the face of injustice, they are choosing complicity, and it is the sadistic form of violence. Not through action, but through deliberate inaction. And it takes lives. We are witnessing the consequences of this silence on a global scale every single day. And not to end in this, I think, dark thoughts, I would like to share with you as well the picture of our heroes. On the March 15th, because of the sonic cannon, we had, let's say, we hardly avoided death of a lot of people. You know, when a mass starts running, it could turn out really deadly. And all this was avoided because students who were keeping the safety of the protests did an amazing job to prevent the deadly situations. So I will share for the end of this video the picture of those students. It's from the Facebook page, I'm sorry, but yeah, here are the heroes. That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone is applauding. Thank you. Thank you all the group with all, I would say, fantastic presentations, really interesting, really touching. And now I would open for questions and answers to the rest of the colleagues who are here. Please do raise your hand in Zoom, and Michael will open the mic. Who will break the ice? Then I will have a short question. What's the current state in Serbia? How is the society working at the moment? If any of you would answer. Society, I think in general, how much is still this protests do influence everyday life?
Alec.
I may try answer the question. Since I'm living in center of Belgrade, so we witness actually that besides the paramilitary formation that our president formed in the front of parliament of his loyalists. Now what is happening in front of government and the old general stab building that was bombed is actually ongoing protest, 24/7 of university professors and assistants, and also students and citizens. I'm very happy that this is happening, but I'm not quite sure how provoking this is also. So yes, we are still very affected. We had extraordinary elections in two cities, Kosoric and Zaječar, and the situation there is very tense, which I'm not going now into details, but no, nothing's just done. We are still awaiting. Also, we didn't solve the issue with the next university year, like school year. I think there is some amendment on the existing law that should give a possibility to all students to freeze this school year. But I'm not quite sure about that because I was out of the city for a couple of days. So if colleagues can add something more.
Thank you. Any other questions from colleagues? Then I would slowly conclude, because I think it was quite substantial, the presentation, and I think a lot to process, because all of you gave so much images, so much stories, so much information. I have the feeling everyone is still thinking about it.
Tine, I would like to share, maybe if I can, that I'm still very moved and still processing. So I agree with your explanation, and I wanted to share that I had very bodily reactions actually to your talk, and shivers, and I was on the verge of crying basically, and yeah, I wanted to share that it was very emotional, and I still have problems finding the right words, but thank you for everything. It was really inspiring.
I have questions from Terrell. Yeah.
Yes. Don't know if you're seeing me.
Yes.
I just wanted to thank you all. I'm an analyst in the Pacific Northwest and North America, and just saw your event announced on one of our analyst web pages today, and I had free time over my lunch period. But thank you for the very moving presentations. It helps sharpen and focus my spirit. We have mass protests tomorrow against our authoritarian and fascist president and his regime, and 50, 10, and Indivisible are calling people out in all American cities tomorrow. And the courage and grace and focus and ensoulment of your protests move me and give me courage for some kind of transformation of the patriarchal nationalist darkness is falling across the globe right now. So thank you very much for letting me join in today and participate, and blessings to all of you and your ongoing work towards transforming your society.
Good luck tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. We're all slow but sure. Our hope is gradually these get larger and larger, so that by maybe the end of the summer, over 50% of all adult Americans will be out in the streets saying, "Not in our name." We do not endorse these values. We love immigrants. We love diversity. We love persons of color. We love a diverse society. To stand out in the streets and speak to this darkness and say, "Not in our name."
Thank you for sharing this. I also have to say, I see what's happening in Serbia quite somehow also a global phenomenon of certain sort of forces, you know, like this strong man. It's a similar situation as in the beginning of the 20th century. This autocrat, strong man was somehow tricking democracy, and here we see a genuine protest that's emerged somehow from bottom up. It's not politically driven, in sense that there would be another party misusing it for its own purpose, but people really do want strong institutions. And I think this is also now the question in the USA, the question of how strong can be the democratic institutions? How long can they hold? Can they prevail?
Well, and many of us are wondering now if they've collapsed, if functionally they've collapsed and we can't get our democracy back. It's a big fear here now in the streets, particularly now that the president has dispersed the military in Los Angeles, which is a step that's never been taken except under extreme circumstances. And it was illegal and immoral and unjust. And we're all quite worried that maybe the guardrails have collapsed.
All right, Len, you have questions?
It's not so much a question, it's just an addition to what Terrell. I'm a little bit south of where Terrell is living. I'm in the Bay Area. And I think one of the things that I think is very important is in our little locales, and I don't just mean the community, I actually also mean our organizational communities. How much diversity of thought, how much can we tolerate with each other, how much can we speak out and let ourselves be unsettled and yet participating. And so I think that, it really begins, and the participation of what I saw in Serbia just now is that there is an experience of collective group, even if they're not necessarily in some kind of structured, organized way. They felt an affinity, a human affinity, being in the streets with each other, not saying anything, at other times saying something, having the support of teachers. So I think that that model, I guess I just feel like it starts in our consulting rooms with how much openness there is between the two people. And it goes on and on and on. It's a ripple effect of hearing each other out and finding our capacity to understand better and our capacity to find compassion and empathy, not let the human race die out, which is what I'm interested in. Thank you.
May I say you something?
Yeah.
When I was speaking with my high school professors, they wanted also to share that the difference between this protest and the protest in 1996, they were included, that because they haven't such a big support from their professors, and they think that this collaboration made the difference and it is the correct key that should be used everywhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn, for wonderful comment. And thank you, Jurica, for this reflection.
There's something about the silent marches that I didn't know about, and I'm deeply touched by them. They must have been incredibly powerful because silence does speak in a certain way to that kind of toxic power. Because at least I feel it in my country, the government wants you to react in a violent way. So then they get to do whatever they want to do and justify it. But if you're walking in silence together and truly with love, but strength, I wish we could adapt and do that, because I think that would be, it'd be an incredible way to do this globally, actually. So thank you for sharing that. Such great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I would invite one last person to comment or question. Otherwise, I would thank everyone. I would thank our Serbian colleagues for the courage to present and their time that they took to make this enlightening, I would say, presentation. to really share the light of what is happening for us to better understand and feel. Because I don't think we get all the information in the media about it. So thank you everyone.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you,
you
everyone.
for happy to
Thank you.
listening. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.